They called it a formality. That is the word the Vrethkai diplomatic attaché used when he transmitted the surrender demand to Earth's orbital communications array. A formality. As if our answer was already written, already sealed, already filed somewhere in the Dominion's long archive of broken civilizations. As if we were simply the next signature on a very old document. I was sitting in a field when the broadcast reached Mars. Red dirt under my boots, a cup of terrible coffee in my hand, and 14 rows of nitrogen bean crops that needed attention before the second frost cycle hit. I had been retired for 3 years. My knees hurt in the cold. My hair had gone fully silver. I was, by every reasonable measure, done with war. Then my comm unit buzzed. Then the sky above Hellas Basin filled with the Dominion's translated message, broadcast on every public frequency across the solar system simultaneously, the way a farmer might announce harvest season, casually, confidently, without the slightest concern for what the crops might think. 217 civilizations have surrendered to the Vrethkai Dominion. You will be the 218th. Lay down your orbital defenses within 48 of your hours. Resistance is not advised. I took a long sip of my terrible coffee. Then I called an old friend at Unstef Command and asked if they needed me back. They did. Let me tell you what the galaxy thought of us back then, because it matters. It matters more than most people realize when they hear this story told at celebrations, or read it summarized in 3 sentences on a historical feed. The broader galactic community, the dozens of species who had been watching civilizations rise and fall for centuries, considered humanity to be a curiosity. Interesting, the way a new insect species is interesting. We had only been spacefaring for 60 years. We were emotional in our decision-making, famously so. We formed attachments to objects, to places, to each other, in ways that older species found inefficient and frankly puzzling. We had spent most of our recorded history fighting each other, which the Vrethkai took as evidence of disorganization, rather than what it actually was. Practice. The Dominion assigned 4% of their standard invasion fleet to Earth. 4%. The Vrethkai Supreme War Council discussed our solar system for approximately 20 minutes before moving on to other agenda items. Their analysts projected the campaign would take 9 days. They scheduled a post-victory reception on the 10th. What they did not know, what no one outside a very small circle of UNSTF officers and Earth government officials knew, was what we had been doing for the past 4 decades. While the Dominion crossed the galaxy, collecting surrenders the way some people collect stamps, Earth had been watching. Every battle was recorded, analyzed, broken apart, and rebuilt as data. We gathered wreckage from worlds the Vrethkai had conquered. We interviewed refugees from fallen civilizations, asking questions no one else thought to ask. Not just how the Dominion fought, but how they thought. What assumptions they carried into every engagement, what they had never needed to question, because no one had ever survived long enough to challenge them. 217 victories had made the Vrethkai very good at winning. It had also made them completely unable to imagine losing. That was the gap we built our entire strategy inside. I will not pretend I was not afraid when the fold space signatures appeared beyond Neptune. 14,000 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a formation so precise, so perfectly rehearsed, that even I, watching from the bridge of the Unstef carrier unyielding, with full battle composure and 30 years of command experience behind me, felt something cold move through my chest. They were enormous. The Vrethkai built their ships the way empires build monuments, not for efficiency, but for effect. Their lead dreadnoughts were 3 kilometers long. Their formation stretched across a volume of space wide enough to swallow several moons. Watching them emerge from fold space on the tactical display was like watching a curtain pulled back to reveal a wall. The bridge was quiet. Not the quiet of fear, though I am certain fear was present in every one of us. The quiet of people who have spent years preparing for a specific moment and are now simply doing the work. My weapons officer was a 26-year-old from Nairobi, named Lieutenant Adayeze Okonkwo. She had run this exact scenario 412 times in simulation. I know, because she told me once, very seriously, that she had stopped dreaming about anything else. She sat at her console and did not move a muscle in her face. I watched her for exactly 2 seconds, decided she was fine, and returned to my own display. The Dominion opened with their standard first strike, a coordinated wave of long-range mass driver rounds aimed at our outer orbital stations. It was the same opening they had used in 217 previous campaigns, effective, reliable, demoralizing, designed to destroy infrastructure and make defenders understand immediately that the cost of resistance would be severe. Every round hit its target perfectly. Every target was empty. We had evacuated and hollowed the outer stations 8 months prior, quietly, without public announcement, rerouting traffic through secondary channels, while engineering teams spent weeks converting each station into an automated decoy platform packed with sensor-reflective material and short-range response drones. From the outside, they read as fully operational. From the inside, they were elaborate props in a play we had written specifically for this audience. The Vrethkai advance began, 14,000 warships moving with the smooth, unhurried confidence of a force that had never once had reason to hurry. They entered the asteroid belt. We had been working on the asteroid belt for 11 years. I will not describe every detail of what followed in the belt, because some of it is still classified, and some of it is simply not the kind of thing that translates well into words. But I will say this. The Vrethkai lost 240 ships in the first 6 hours of transit, and their commanders had no clear understanding of what was killing them until the 4th hour. Every rock, every floating chunk of ancient debris, every shadow in that vast stretch of stone and silence, had been considered, evaluated, and in many cases quietly modified. Sensor nets disguised as natural formations, missile platforms buried inside hollowed asteroids, waiting, micro-drone swarms and compressed canisters that activated on proximity triggers. The belt was not a minefield. A minefield is passive, static, dependent on the enemy walking into it. What we had built was more like a conversation, one where we controlled every line. The Vrethkai Supreme Commander, a being called Veth Karal, was by all accounts a brilliant military mind. He had personally led 41 of the Dominion's 217 campaigns. He was not accustomed to confusion. He was not accustomed to an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, that gave no clear front line to engage, that did not fight the way every species the Dominion had ever encountered had fought. He committed his reserve fleet, all of it, a force he had never needed to deploy before. I heard this on the tactical feed, and felt the nearest thing to happiness I had experienced since before the war began. Because that was exactly what we needed him to do. The inner solar system is where humans live. Mercury, Venus, Earth and its moon, Mars. The stations and platforms and habitats scattered between them, home to 6 billion people spread across the infrastructure of a civilization that had been quietly, methodically, furiously fortifying every approach for 4 decades. When you fight on ground that holds everything you love, you do not fight carefully. You fight completely. Every human commander who had trained for this scenario understood that there was no acceptable outcome except one, and that clarity, that absolute unambiguous understanding of the stakes, is something that cannot be simulated and cannot be manufactured. Either you have it or you do not. We had it. Veth Karal drove his full fleet into the inner system, trailing the wreckage of his outer forces, expecting to find a broken defender ready to bargain. Instead, he found the entire remaining strength of the United Nations Solar Defense Force formed up and waiting, not retreating, not repositioning, not doing any of the things that 2,200 years of Dominion combat experience had taught him to expect from a civilization at the end of its rope. We held, we pushed, we absorbed fire and returned it threefold. And then, at the moment his tactical analysis would have told him that final victory was approximately 4 minutes away, the second Unstead fleet emerged from the sun. We had kept them there for 9 days, running silent in the solar corona, in conditions that were brutal and borderline uninhabitable even inside hardened warships, sustained entirely by the knowledge that the Vrethkai sensor arrays, optimized across 2 centuries of campaigns against enemies who had never once tried anything remotely like this, were completely blind in that region of electromagnetic interference. 412 warships, emerging at point-blank range, carrying solar-charged rail cannon rounds that a team of human engineers had spent 7 years calculating would do something very specific to Vrethkai shield harmonics, something that had never been tested in combat because no one had ever had cause to test it, because no battle had ever reached a stage where the Dominion needed to worry about their shields. The shields failed. The battle lasted another 3 hours. At the end of it, Veth Karal transmitted a single word. We had it translated later by the Vrethkai interpreter we had taken on as a consultant 2 years prior. She told us it meant something close to impossible, not as a statement of denial, but as a genuine expression of incomprehension, as if the concept of what had just happened to him did not fit inside the categories his mind had available. His flagship was destroyed 11 seconds after the transmission. Of the 14,000 ships that had dropped out of fold space beyond Neptune, 940 escaped, most of them scattered into deep space with insufficient fuel to reach Vrethkai territory. A handful surrendered. None of them made it home in any meaningful sense. The Grand Armada of the Vrethkai Dominion, the fleet that had brought 217 civilizations to their knees, did not return. The galaxy went quiet for 3 days. I do not mean that communications dropped. I mean that every species with a long-range sensor array had been watching, and when it was over, no one quite knew what to say. The Shreth Collective, who had surrendered to the Dominion 60 years ago and had never stopped grieving it, transmitted a message to Earth, consisting entirely of a sound their species makes when they witness something they believe they will spend the rest of their lives trying to understand. The Polari Confederation, who had advised us 18 months prior to simply accept the Dominion's terms and preserve what we could, sent their senior diplomat to Earth's orbital station without an appointment and waited in the reception area for 11 hours until someone could see her. 41 species contacted us within a week. Requests for alliance, requests for information, requests to simply speak with whoever was in charge and ask them what, exactly, we had done and how we had thought to do it. I was recalled from the unyielding to address the Joint Council of Galactic Observers. I walked into that chamber, still wearing a combat-rated jumpsuit that had a pressure seal repair on the left shoulder and a burn mark near the collar that I had not gotten around to replacing. I did not apologize for it. I sat down, and a very old Polari diplomat with kind eyes looked at me across the table and asked the question that everyone in the room was thinking. How did you know you could win? I thought about it for a moment, not because I did not know the answer, but because I wanted to give her an honest one, rather than a comfortable one. We did not know, I told her, but we knew we could not afford to lose. And it turns out there is a significant difference between those two things. And that difference, when you are preparing for 40 years, is enough to work with. She was quiet for a long time after that. The Vrethkai Dominion did not collapse immediately. Empires rarely do. But its greatest weapon had never been its fleet or its technology. It had been the story it told. The story of inevitability, of 217 victories meaning 218, of surrender being the only rational choice for a reasonable civilization. That story was finished. Within 8 years, 6 of the civilizations the Dominion had conquered rose against their occupying forces. They won 4 of those revolutions. The Dominion spent the following decade managing internal fractures rather than expanding its borders. The reception scheduled for the 10th day after our expected surrender was never held. Veth Karal's name, which had been a word meaning certainty in Vrethkai culture, became a complicated word instead, one that younger generations used in ways that made their elders uncomfortable. We lost 4,837 people. I know each number in that count. I have read every name. Some of them were people I had trained alongside, eaten terrible meals with in deep space stations, argued with over tactics in the small hours of the morning when the simulations refused to go our way. I do not celebrate the victory without remembering the cost of it, because the two things cannot honestly be separated. I went back to my farm, red dirt, nitrogen beans, the terrible coffee that I have since improved somewhat with a better filtration system, though not as much as I would like. My granddaughter came to visit during the harvest season, as she always does. She is 9 years old and very serious about everything, which I find deeply reassuring. She sat on the fence while I worked and thought about something for a long time, the way she does when a question is forming. Finally, she asked me whether the Dominion would ever come back. I set down my tools and looked at her. Maybe, I told her honestly. The galaxy is large, and memory is shorter than we would like. But aren't you scared? She asked. I thought about the bridge of the unyielding, about Adogwo, Okonkwo sitting perfectly still at her console, about 412 ships hiding in the fire of the sun for 9 days because someone had calculated that it was possible and everyone aboard had decided it was necessary. No, I told my granddaughter, not particularly, because they know what is waiting now, and so does everyone else. She thought about that, nodded once with great seriousness, and went back to watching the crops. I picked up my tools and kept working. We did not fight to prove we were the strongest. We fought so that the children who came after us would never have to prove anything at all. That was the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. The Dominion came for their 218th victory. They found something that 217 victories had never taught them to expect. They found us ready.